Right on. Okay, everybody. Welcome back to the Hoplite channel. Happy Halloween if you're watching this on the day of its release. This is Halloween 2021. Hope you're having a good one. And if you're here, you are here to see The Prince, Part 1. All right, yeah. As I said, this will be the first part of NIccolò di Bernardo de Machiavelli's The Prince. And I'm probably going to cut this up into 3 different parts. There'll be short episodes, I'm hoping, considering all of my other series have gone on for a lot of time. I want to say I'm averaging like 45 to 50 minutes per part, which is a lot. So for those of you who stick around for the entirety of those episodes and those readings, I appreciate it. You are true intellectuals, and it will serve you well, hopefully, in the future. But yeah, today we're going to cover The Prince. And I thought it would be a good companion piece to von Clausewitz's Art of War and Sun Tzu's Art of War. Although The Prince was written prior to Art of War, they share many similarities, of course, in the subject matter. So let's get a little background on our author here. I'll go into a little bit more detail as far as historical background in part 2, but here's a little quick snapshot. As I said, author NIccolò di Bernardo de Machiavelli, although just simply Machiavelli. He was born May 3rd, 1469 in Florence, Italy, and he died June 21st, 1527 in the town of his birth. So he was a Florentine boy, he was a hometown boy his whole life. Florence and Machiavelli, pretty synonymous. And during this period in Florence, a lot was going on politically, as we'll see. But Machiavelli was born the 3rd child to a Florentine attorney, so you know he was from evil itself. Just kidding for all the attorneys out there. Most of you aren't evil. Bernardo Machiavelli was his father, obviously Niccolò di Bernardo. And he was raised during a period of tumult in Italian politics as popes waged war against factions within city-states and condottieri, mercenary leaders, formed alliances and changed alliances. Right, so in this period in Italian politics, and particularly in Florence, which was a very rich city, a hub of international trade and commerce. All this going on in Italy, a lot of it centered around Florence because there was so much money, and obviously money equals power in this world, in the Western world at this time. So you had political factions waging political wars against each other, but it also transgressed into physical conflict. And we see that in 1494, when Machiavelli was reaching adulthood, the Medici family was expelled and the Florentine Republic was restored. And I'll go into more detail about the Medici family because, as it turns out, The Prince was written by Machiavelli to the young Lorenzo de' Medici. And the Medici family, again, is as synonymous with Florence as Machiavelli would be. But the Medici family was one of the wealthiest families in Italy during this period, and you could say that their wealth was akin to, a Rockefeller or a J.P. Morgan or a Rothschild. The Medici family, they were that kind of a name. But because of their prominence, they were also big targets. And in particular, they were targets for Rodrigo Borgia and his son Cesare Borgia. And in 1502, between 1502 and 1503, Rodrigo Borgia, who later became Pope Alexander VI, he, through his son Cesare, sought to consolidate the power that the Medicis left as a vacuum was created in Florence during this time. And they did consolidate that power because if you believe the President of the United States is a powerful man, or pick any European leader, in 1502 to be Pope, to be the Holy Father, leader of the Roman Catholic Church at this time, that was about as powerful as it gets. And the Borgia family knew this. And I'll get into some more detail about the Borgias as well. But These people were straight up evil, for sure. I'm saying Pope Alexander VI, I'm saying this as a Catholic too. If you know anything about his history, the Borgia family, and what they did to control politics and increase their family wealth, bad people. But it is through this lens we have to read the works of Machiavelli and what he was telling the young Lorenzo de' Medici, that you might believe this about the world, you might have been taught that, but let me tell you how it really works. And it's brutal, it's cutthroat, it's vicious, it's dog eat dog, and if you don't adopt this mentality, you're going to be the dog that gets eaten. Right. There's that famous quote, right, that everyone, if anyone's read The Prince or anything by Machiavelli, all they know is this: it is good to be loved, but it is better to be feared. If you can be loved and feared at the same time, that's the best of both worlds. But if it came down to one or the other, a prince should seek to be feared by those he means to rule rather than loved. Because fear can be used at any given time, whereas love is something that the prince will rely upon from the people to be given to him at their own free will. Fear is something that he will control, whereas love is what the people will control as what they choose to give back to their ruler. Again, very cutthroat, very Hobbesian, but this is just what Machiavelli believed and what he felt a prince should know if he intends to be an effective ruler. Okay, there's the bio. Now let's get into some readings. Right here, I will provide the go-bys as I always do. And we're going to jump to chapter 3. The book itself, again, is very short, like all the other books that I've chosen for these series. It's got to be, it's less than 130 pages. So if you don't have a copy of this, get one. It's cheap. Put it in your library. Read it one afternoon. Put it down. Pick it up the next day. And then give yourself time to digest it. Come back in a year and read it again. And you'll learn new things as I did. It's very good. And it's survived, over 500 years for good reason. Okay, let's go to chapter 3, and this is under the chapter of mixed monarchies. And Machiavelli wrote, "But it is in the new monarchy that difficulties really exist. First, if it is not entirely new, but a member, as it were, of a mixed state, its disorders spring at first from a natural difficulty which exists in all new dominions, because men change masters willingly, hoping to better themselves, and this belief makes them take arms against their rulers, in which they are deceived, as experience later proves that they have gone from bad to worse. This is the result of another very natural cause, which is the inevitable harm inflicted on those over whom the prince obtains dominion, both by his soldiers and by an infinite number of other injuries caused by his occupation. It is indeed true that after reconquering rebel territories, they are not so easily lost again, for the ruler is now, by the fact of the rebellion, less averse to secure his position by punishing offenders, unmasking suspects, and strengthening himself in weak places. Whoever obtains possession of such territories and wishes to retain them must bear in mind two things: the one, that the blood of their old rulers be extinct; the other, to make no alteration either in their laws or in their taxes. In this way, they will in a very short space of time become united with their old possessions and form one state." Okay, so in this chapter, what he's saying is that for a new monarchy to take over a territory, it's difficult because you're in a mixed state. You're not inheriting a monarchy from your father as the king or from your uncle as a baron or what have you. You're taking over a new territory, and people will change masters willingly, right? As in, you've conquered our territory, but I think the guy who's next to you is plotting his own takeover, and it looks like he has a greater force. And since this is all in transitory phase, I'm going to throw in with him, and maybe he will win and beat you, and then he'll be the next sovereign. So what he's saying here is that this is the result of another natural cause, which is the inevitable harm inflicted on those over whom the prince obtains dominion by soldiers and by the infinite number of injuries caused by his occupation. right? So to conquer new territory, you're going to have to make life difficult for the people you conquer. You're going to have to kill their kinsmen or their friends or their associates. And then your occupation is going to take a toll as well, because like the new boss is in town, so it's going to be hard to deal with. So what does he say? That after you reconquer rebel territories, it's not easily lost again, because now if you've had to reconquer it, you have no reason for withholding punishments from offenders and unmasking suspects. But he concludes in this first reading that whoever obtains possession of territories and wishes to retain them must bear in mind two things: that the blood of the old rulers is extinct, and that you should make no alteration to the laws or the taxes. And this is key, right? So when you take over and you declare yourself the new sovereign of this territory, you have to do two things. And the first is obviously the most immediate, and that is the old boss is dead, right? I beat him. He's gone. He's out. He's finished. He's not coming back. It's me now. And then secondly, because these people have to digest this new reality, as in the old sovereign, the old ruler is gone, you should not change their laws or their taxes, at least not in the immediate sense, because that at least gives them some stability. They have the expectation of, well, before you came around and killed our ruler or took over his possessions, these were the laws and these were the taxes. As this prince, you should adopt those customs, those laws and those taxes for the short term at the very least, because it will then later ease the people into accepting you as the new ruler, because their day-to-day lives are mostly dictated by those two things, laws and taxes. If there's a new guy on their money and the old guy's gone, they're like, well, it's still my money, so who cares whose face is on it? Or who cares whose image is stamped on my coinage? As long as it's worth the same amount of money, and as long as I have to give this tax man no more, I can live with it. And there's the movie that reminds me of this is it's not exactly in the like royal sense, but in the movie Gangs of New York, in the opening scenes, there's the war between the dead rabbits and the natives, and Bill the Butcher represents the head of the native gang. Liam Neeson is the priest. And Dan Day-Lewis is he's one of my favorite actors, but that role, like, he was the best. That movie is so great just because of him. But when they wage war in the streets, the priest is killed by Bill the Butcher. After it's over, Bill says two things. Make sure he gets a proper burial, but then he tells the people the dead rabbits are over and the priest is dead with that name. Let no one after this day speak its name. Let no one speak his name. He's telling them that the old order is gone. The old ruler is gone with it. Accept it. It's me now. But since he's now in charge of that territory, he makes no massive moves against the people who reside in that territory themselves. He's just letting them know, I'm in charge now. The old order is gone. Accept that. And I will be a just and fair ruler just as much as your previous ruler was. And I will be better in the long term. So the taxes, the laws, I guess if you call it the gang laws, don't change. But the new order is in charge, and that's all the people have to accustom themselves to. And as a prince, you can maintain control if you obey those two rules. Okay, let's move to page 36, same chapter. And Machiavelli wrote, but when dominions are acquired in a province differing in language, laws, and customs, the difficulties to be overcome are great, and it requires good fortune as well as great industry to retain them. One of the best and most certain means of doing so would be for the new ruler to take up his residence there. Being on the spot, disorders can be seen as they arise and can quickly be remedied. But living at a distance, they are only heard of when they get beyond remedy. Besides which, the province is not despoiled by your officials, the subjects being able to obtain satisfaction by direct recourse to their prince, and wishing to be loyal, they have more reason to love him. And should they be otherwise inclined, they will have greater cause to fear him. Any external power who wishes to assail that state will be less disposed to do so, so that as long as he resides there, he will be very hard to dispossess. The other and better remedy is to plant colonies in one or two of those places which form, as it were, the keys to the land. For it is necessary either to do this or to maintain a larger force of armed men. The colonies will cost the prince little. With little or no expense on his part, he can send and maintain them. He only injures those whose lands and houses are taken to give to the new inhabitants, and these form but a small proportion of the state. And those who are injured, remaining poor and scattered, can never do any harm to him. And all the others are, on the other hand, not injured and therefore easily pacified. And on the other are fearful of at least lest they should be treated like those who have been dispossessed. To conclude, these colonies cost nothing, are more faithful, and give less offense, and the injured parties, being poor and scattered, are unable to do mischief, as I have shown. For it must be noted that men must either be caressed or else annihilated. They will revenge themselves for small injuries, but cannot do so for great ones. The injury, therefore, that we do to a man must be such that we need not fear his vengeance. But by maintaining a garrison instead of colonists, one will spend much more, and consume all the revenues of the state in guarding it, so that the acquisition will be result in loss, besides giving much greater offense, since it injures every one in that state with the quartering of the army on it, which, being an inconvenience felt by all, every one becomes an enemy. And these are enemies which can do mischief, as though beaten they remain in their own homes. In every way, therefore, a garrison is as useless as colonies are useful. Okay. That was a little bit of a longer one, but it's good. So what he's saying in this passage, continuing on the earlier passage, was dominions that you acquire in provinces that differ in language, laws, customs, etc. These are even more difficult to maintain because you don't have a commonality with the people that you're attempting to rule over. So not only are you changing who's in command, as in their sovereign, but you're coming in and you have no frame of reference because you don't understand these people's laws. You don't maybe understand their tax system, their tax structure. Is it a caste system? Is it a feudal system? Is it a republic? Is it a democracy? You don't know. So this is more difficult to maintain. But he says you have two options in regards to territories you conquer that are different in laws, customs, etc. And that is through operation of colonies or garrisons. And he says the colonies are more useful because all you essentially do is leave part of your force in that territory and maintain it from a distance. Whereas in a garrison, you essentially have to occupy this territory as though it were your own. Colonies are useful in the sense that you maintain more or less hegemony over the territory as a colony, and the people who you leave in charge of it should correspond with you regularly as to what's going on and keeping the peace. The people will not feel as though they are necessarily occupied as a colony, but they will see themselves more as an extension of your wealth, of your empire, of your kingdom. If you leave a garrison there, there's no doubt about it. We're occupying you because we don't trust you and we want to keep you underfoot. We want you to essentially live as second-class citizenry. And if you do that, the people can never truly be pacified because they're always in a perpetual state of this tension. Who made a big mistake in this regard? Well, you could say it was the English in two major respects. Number one was Scotland, right? And number two with the American colonies. England essentially had Scotland as a territory, which, I mean, was essentially part of their own island. It was just the northern half of it. But they operated Scotland as a colony. They considered it part of the United Kingdom, but the Scottish never really truly felt part of the UK. They more or less considered themselves serfs, which in truth they were. And England treated Scotland brutally because of this regarded they were inferior, that they were colonists, technically part of their kingdom, but without a doubt second class. They were the hillbillies. They were the hicks that lived up in the hills and played awful music on bagpipes. That was the perception that the English had of the Scots. And the Scots regarded the English as the rich military force that compelled them to live under their rule, but not as even colonists, but as second-class landed gentry, and they would rise no higher. So what did the Scots do? Well, if you've seen the movie Braveheart, that pretty much explains what they did. They revolted. And that's what Machiavelli says here, is that the acquisition will result in loss, besides giving much greater offense, since it injures everyone in the state with quartering of the army on it, which being an inconvenience felt by all, everyone becomes an enemy, and these are enemies who can do mischief. Right, so that he's saying that in regards to keeping a garrison versus a colony. The English screwed up again many years later with the American colonies, is that they operated America as a separate colonial entity of the empire, but they still kept significant military forces in those colonies. They never truly let the colonies operate any significant autonomy, and the colonists knew this. And they revolted, and America separated and became its own sovereign nation because of it. Because England couldn't decide what to do. Do we let these colonies operate autonomy, yet maintain, a very small but noticeable presence in the colonies? Or do we call them colonists and colonies, but we keep massive amounts of military in the colonies, which amount to a garrison? So we call it a colony, but we operate garrisons there. They didn't know which way to do it, so they kind of did it in between. But the colonists in America, they knew what was up. They knew that the United States was being used as a cash cow for England, and a garrison was being kept there, yet they were being told that oh no, you're colonists, you're just like us. We knew that wasn't true. Canada, same thing. Canada wasn't as much of a cash cow for the UK. So Canada still, I think to this day, considers themselves somewhat part of the United Kingdom. I think Queen Elizabeth still appears on their money. And the UK, I'm not positive about this. Maybe my Canadian friends will know, but if you're from Canada, your passport is interchangeable with the UK, meaning your Canadian passport is good enough to get you in and out of anywhere in the United Kingdom. That might be wrong, I don't know. But Canadians still regard themselves as somewhat part of the United Kingdom because they never went through a war that the United States went through, because there was never a massive garrison of troops being kept in Canada to the same extent as it was the United States. Because the United States, via the southern states, had those cash crops of tobacco, of cotton, sugar, etc. So that's essentially why England couldn't let America just run its own shop. There was too much money at stake. So they kept a garrison. But as Machiavelli told them, either you occupy that country from the get-go, or you let them operate as colonies, because you can't play both sides. You can't call them colonies and operate garrisons there, because you will make enemies of everyone and they will do much mischief. And much mischief they did. Okay, let's move on to the next reading. This is on page 38, same chapter, chapter 3. And Machiavelli said, "The Romans in the provinces they took always followed this policy. They established colonies, invaded the less powerful without increasing their strength, put down the most powerful, and did not allow foreign rulers to obtain influence in them. I will adduce the province of Greece as a sole example. They made friends with the Achaeans and the Aetolians. The kingdom of Macedonia was cast down, and Antiochus driven out, nor did they allow the merits of the Achaeans or the Aetolians to gain them any increase of territory, nor did the persuasions of Philip induce them to befriend him without reducing his influence, nor could the power of Antiochus make them consent to allow him to hold any state in that province. For the Romans did in these cases what all wise princes should do, who consider not only present but also future discords, and diligently guard against them. For being foreseen, they can easily be remedied, But if one waits till they are at hand, the medicine is no longer in time, as the malady has become incurable. It happening with this as with those hectic fevers, as doctors say, which at their beginning are easy to cure but difficult to recognize, but in course of time, when they have not at first been recognized and treated, become easy to recognize and difficult to cure. Thus it happens in matters of state, for knowing afar off, which it is only given to a prudent man to do, the evils that are brewing, they are easily cured, but when for want of such knowledge they are allowed to grow so that every one can recognize them, there is no longer any remedy to be found. Therefore the Romans, observing disorders while yet remote, were always able to find a remedy, and never allowed them to increase in order to avoid a war. For they knew that war is not to be avoided, and can be deferred only to the advantage of the other side. They therefore declared war against Philip and Antiochus in Greece, so as not to have to fight them in Italy. Though they might at the time have avoided either, this they did not choose to do, never caring to do that which is now every day to be heard of in the mouths of otherwise men, namely to enjoy the advantages of delay, but preferring to trust their own virtue and prudence. For time brings with it all things, and may produce indifferently either good or evil. Okay, so that was a very roundabout way of saying, okay, listen, if you see something developing, chances are you should have seen it before. As in, things that are easily curable are remedied before they even happen. But things that are easily recognized, normally there is no longer a remedy to be found. And the Romans were prudent in this, in that they did not permit the conditions in their colonies to even exist where they would be at risk of losing them. In other words, when the Romans set up colonies, they took measures to make sure that they put down the most powerful influences within that colony and raised up the lesser of the influences, so that there was a balance, right? You put down the powerful interests in that colony and you raise up the less powerful, and they act as a check against each other. Similarly, you don't allow the powerful influences around that colony to introduce themselves, as in, hey, maybe I can help you out of this whole thing with Rome and you can become a colony of our kingdom, or whatever. They didn't allow that to happen. And he mentions that with how Rome treated Greece and the Achaeans and the Aetolians and Philip. English didn't do this with America. The English allowed America to more or less run its own shop as the 13 colonies for quite some time. Then they realized the colonies were generating a boatload of wealth. And then they said, hey, I don't know if we can trust this just to kind of run its own shop. We should probably start introducing more restrictions, more taxes, more customs, more laws, and maybe we should send a greater military presence there to just keep things on the up and up. Yeah, so they already started noticing the symptoms of what was going to be American independence. They did not put in place the preventative measures that the Romans would have put in to prohibit that from ever happening. And once they started to notice that the American colonies had become more and more independent, had become more and more independently wealthy, showed greater promise in the future, it was too late. Once they had sent garrisons to try and control these colonies and to bring them under wraps, the colonists had said, yeah, we know what you're trying to do. This is ours now. And then the war kicked off. The Romans, on the other hand, put measures in place so that they would never have to fight that war at home or lose that colony in a war in that colony. They made sure that if they were going to lose a colony, whoever was going to take it from them was going to have to fight tooth and nail. And that's how Rome was able to maintain its empire for so long. Okay, let's move on to chapter 4. And this is under the title, Why the Kingdom of Darius, occupied by Alexander, did not rebel against the successors of the latter after his death. And Machiavelli wrote, considering the difficulties there are in holding a newly acquired state, some may wonder how it came to pass that Alexander the Great became master of Asia in a few years, and had hardly occupied it when he died. from which it might be supposed that the whole state would have rebelled. However, his successors maintained themselves in possession and had no further difficulties in doing so than those which arose among themselves from their own ambitions. I reply that the kingdoms known to history have been governed in two ways, either by a prince and his servants, who as ministers by his grace and permission assist in governing the realm, or by a prince and by barons, who hold their positions not by favor of the ruler, but by antiquity of blood. Such barons have states and subjects of their own, who recognize them as their lords, and are naturally attached to them. In those states, which are governed by a prince and his servants, the prince possesses more authority, because there is no one in the state regarded as superior other than himself. And if others are obeyed, it is merely as ministers and officials of the prince, and no one regards them with any special affection. Okay. Yeah, so I'll stop right here before I continue. What he's saying is that with Alexander, there were, conditions that explained his rule over Asia after he had killed Darius and taken over. And he says, for a prince to come into a new kingdom, there are two ways in which he can operate this new kingdom, essentially keep it as a colony. And that is, he will set up a system of barons, essentially nobility, not superior to him, of course, but a level just slightly below. And they will maintain certain provinces within that kingdom, and then they will pass on those provinces that they maintain by virtue of blood, as in their sons will become barons after them, and those sons will have sons, and so forth. But he says, as this goes on, as barons become more wealthy and more well-known to the provinces in which they occupy, people regard the baron or the manager of their immediate province as the ruler. They will see you as a ruler from perhaps far off as controlling the entirety of the land, but they will see the baron, the person who they, report to on a day-to-day basis more often, and they will start to regard him as the just and the fair ruler, because that's who they have to deal with. Maybe some of these barons will recognize this power and will exercise a attempt at conspiracy to overthrow you, knowing that they have the will and the support of the people, not you. That's possible. So he suggests there's a second option where you essentially rule supreme over the land, and you have servants who manage the land for you, but they're not given any title of nobility. They're not given any special status. They are merely administrators of your state. Perhaps they're elected, perhaps they're appointed, and you appoint them and you remove them, or you execute them if they act up. But people know that this person is simply there as an administrator of your state and not nobility in and of themselves. There's nothing special about them. Thus he says those are two methods. Okay, and we'll continue on. Page 43. Machiavelli says, examples of these two kinds of governments in our own time are those of the Turk and the King of France. All the Turkish monarchy is governed by one ruler. The others are his servants, and dividing his kingdom into sanjiates. He sends to them various administrators and changes or recalls them at his pleasure. But the King of France is surrounded by a large number of ancient nobles, recognized by such as their subjects and loved by them. They have their prerogatives, of which the king cannot deprive them without danger to himself. Whoever now considers these two states will see that it would be difficult to acquire the state of the Turk, but having conquered it, would be very easy to hold it. In many respects, on the other hand, it would be easier to conquer the kingdom of France, but there would be greater difficulty in holding it. The causes of the difficulty of occupying the Turkish kingdom are that the invader could not be invited by the princes of that kingdom, nor hope to facilitate his enterprise by the rebellion of those near the ruler's person, as will be evident from reasons given above. Because, being all slaves and dependent, it will be more difficult to corrupt them, and even if they were corrupted, little effect could be hoped for, as they would not be able to carry the people with them for the reasons mentioned. Therefore, whoever assaults the Turk must be prepared to meet his united forces, and must rely more on his own strength than on the disorders of others. But having once conquered him and beaten him in battle, so that he can no longer raise armies, nothing else is to be feared except the family of the prince. And if this is to be extinguished, there is no longer anyone to be feared. Others having no credit with the people, and as the victor before the victory could place no hope in them, so he need not fear them afterwards. Okay, so what he's saying is you have the kingdom of the Turk, which would be the Sultanate, and you have the kingdom of France, which would be King Louis or whoever. And he's saying that in the Turkish kingdom, the Sultan is supreme. He is the supreme ruler. There's no doubt about it. Everybody in the kingdom will tell you that. And all the people below the Sultan are his generals or his administrators. But there is no lords and ladies, barons, baronesses, dukes, none of that crap. It's just the Sultan and his state and the administrators. On the other hand, the King of France maintains a kingdom, but he relies upon the barons, the lords, the dukes, the viceroy, etc. He relies upon a very complex network of nobility. And like most nobility, these people are arrogant pricks like him. So when they start to feel like they have not been given enough authority, or that their family has not achieved the heights of his ambition, maybe these people can be influenced by an outside invading force to betray you. And then they will increase their stake in your country after you're gone and the new ruler comes in. As in, if I betray my king and my fellow nobles throw in with me, what do you promise us in return? Okay, that is an easier country to invade, because the underlying nobility could perhaps invite you in if they're dissatisfied with their ruler. But as he said, it's an easier country to invade and conquer, but it's harder to maintain. Because once you take over, those same people who betrayed you are still going to be in that whole network of nobility. So you're going to have to worry about them just as much as the guy who you overthrew had to worry about them. The Sultan's kingdom, however, it's the opposite. It's very hard to invade. It's very hard to take over, because if you come up against the Sultan and you invade the kingdom of the Turk, he can rally all the forces with a single word. And he puts it out, and all the administrators send the word out. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Sultan says this guy has to go. We're going to war. We're invading. And that's that. That's a harder kingdom to invade and conquer. But when you do, if you are successful, you essentially replace the Sultan, which means you get rid of all his administrators and you bring in your own. And all of those administrators, all of those people who are essentially slaves, they work for you and only you. So now you can more easily maintain that kingdom than you could the kingdom of a France, because there's not these go-betweens, these lower ranking nobility. That's what Machiavelli is saying to the prince. Okay, last reading of this chapter, rather. That's page 45. He concludes chapter 4 and says, "Now if you will consider what was the nature of the government of Darius, you will find it similar to the kingdom of the Turk. And therefore Alexander had first to overthrow it completely and invade the territory, after which victory, Darius being dead, the state remained secure to Alexander for the reasons discussed. And his successors, had they remained united, might have enjoyed it in peace. Nor did any tumults arise in the kingdom except those fomented by themselves. But it is impossible to possess with such ease countries constituted like France. Hence arose the frequent rebellions of Spain, France, and Greece against the Romans, owing to the numerous principalities which existed in those states. For as long as the memory of these lasted, the Romans were always uncertain of their conquest. But when the memory of these principalities had been extinguished, and with the power and duration of the empire, they became unchallenged masters. When the Romans fell out amongst themselves, any one of them could count on the support of that part of the province where he had established authority. The Romans alone were recognized as rulers there after the extinction of the old line of princes. Considering these things, therefore, let no one be surprised at the facility with which Alexander was able to hold Asia, and at the difficulties the others have had in holding conquered territories, like Pyrrhus and many others, as this was not caused by the greater or lesser ability of the conqueror, but depended on the dissimilarity of the conditions." So, spoiler alert, Machiavelli is saying, you want to be the Sultan. You want to be in the kingdom of the Turk. You want to be the prince who, like Alexander, lays waste to his enemy and then controls it as the sole authority and just replaces the administration. There is no such worry of rebellion or conspiracy or overthrow from the lower nobility. You have conquered your opponent, you rule as supreme ruler, and you answer to no one, and no one answers to you except your administrators. And you can just as easily replace them as anything else. Yeah, spoiler alert, Machiavelli says, rule as the supreme ruler. Don't leave it up to nobility to second guess you or to stab you in the back. Be like Alexander. Be like the kingdom of the Turk. Okay, and he mentions Pyrrhus, right? That's where we get the term of Pyrrhic victory, as in you've won a great victory, but it will be short-lived because the conditions that exist after your victory make your overthrow almost a certainty. That's where the term Pyrrhic victory comes from. The King Pyrrhus. I'm not sure how that story goes, but I know that's where that saying comes from. All right, let's move to the final reading here. This is chapter 5, page 46. The way to govern cities or dominions that, previous to being occupied, lived under their own laws. And Machiavelli wrote, when those states which have been acquired are accustomed to live at liberty under their own laws, there are 3 ways of holding them. The first is to despoil them. The second is to go and live there in person. The third is to allow them to live under their own laws, taking tribute of them, and creating with the country a government composed of a few who will keep it friendly to you. Because this government, being created by the prince, knows that it cannot exist without his friendship and protection, and will do all it can to keep them. What is more, a city used to liberty can be more easily held by means of its citizen than in any other way, if you wish to preserve it. There is the example of the Spartans and the Romans. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes by creating within them a government of a few. Nevertheless, they lost them. The Romans, in order to hold Capua, Carthage, and Numantia, ravaged them, but did not lose them. They wanted to hold Greece in almost the same way as the Spartans held it, leaving it free under its own laws, but they did not succeed, so that they were compelled to lay waste many cities in that province in order to keep it, because in truth there is no sure method of holding them except by despoiling them. And whoever becomes the ruler of a free city and does not destroy it can expect to be destroyed by it, for it can always find a motive for rebellion in the name of liberty and of its ancient usages, which are forgotten neither by lapse of time nor by benefits received. And whatever one does or provides, so long as the inhabitants are not separated or dispersed, they do not forget that name and those usages, but appeal to them at once in every emergency, as did Pisa after so many years held in servitude by the Florentines. In republics, there is greater life, greater hatred, and more desire for vengeance. They do not and cannot cast aside the memory of their ancient liberty, so that the surest way is either to lay them waste or reside in them. Okay. Getting savage here, Niccolò. So what he's saying is that as a prince, if you want to keep territories that you conquer, and you've acquired states that are accustomed to liberty, which is they were republics or democracies prior to your arrival, there's 3 ways to go about it. Number 1, you just kick the crap out of them. You despoil them, as in you essentially go in there like Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, and you're just stacking up bodies left and right, and everybody surrenders. And whatever they knew about liberty and freedom and rights, that's gone, that's dead, that ain't coming back, so forget about it. And you breathe that life out of them. Number 2, you reside in that country with them. You allow them their laws, you allow them their customs, but you never let them forget that you are down the street. You are in their territory, and you will come down on them like a ton of bricks if they decide to get funny and try to secure their freedom and restore their liberties. The third way, he says, is that you essentially set up a colony, right? You create a puppet government or what have you, and you leave that government there, and as long as the people obey your puppet government's orders and pay them tribute, which is more or less to you, you'll let them live their lives. They'll have some of their liberty back. They'll get to keep their laws and customs, and life for them will more or less be the same. It's just, you're there too. That's the 3 ways. You despoil them, as you conquer them and burn stuff to the ground. You conquer them, you live in their territory, you exert pressure, but you don't completely lay them to waste. And the third, which I guess you consider on the hot cold scale, this would be the coolest, is you establish a government there, they pay that government tribute, which sends you tribute, and they more or less get to live their lives without too much influence. Here's the warning, he says, is that, yeah, Rome tried to do this with Sparta. Sparta held Athens and Thebes, and then when Rome came around and wanted to do the same thing that Sparta had done with Athens and Thebes, the Athenians and the Thebians rebelled. They wanted freedom back, they wanted liberty back, and Rome had to go in there and ravage the place. Because that's what the Spartans did. The Spartans tried to leave Athens and Thebes to their own devices so long as they paid tribute to Sparta following the Peloponnesian War, and it didn't work out. They lost it. The Romans almost lost it too. So the Romans had to go, full Monty in there and just, Leroy Jenkins and just kick their asses and said, okay, we try to do things your way. We try to give you liberty and freedom to a certain extent. You abuse that, and now we're going to abuse the hell out of you. So what he's saying is, in republics, there is greater life, greater hatred, and more desire for vengeance and liberty. They do not and cannot cast aside the memory of their ancient liberty, so that the surest way is either to lay waste or reside there. So he's saying, forget this idea that you're going to set up some government and then sail back across the ocean and manage your affairs in your own home country, and that these people are going to live a world away from you, pay your government tribute, and then forget about their ancient customs of liberty and the republic. They're going to want that back. So easiest way is to conquer them, create a peace as soon as you can, and then reside there. And you'd have to maintain it. You have to become a landlord. You can't be an absentee landlord. Or, as I'm sure he might suggest, just kick the crap out of them. Just bring them down to their knees, make them beg for their lives, make them give up all sense of who they were, and just destroy them utterly like the Romans did with Athens and Thebes. And you could do it that way too. That's what his advice was for part one. Okay, that'll wrap it up for this episode on the Prince. Part one, part two coming up next. Hopefully I'll get that out here sooner rather than later. Again, this is Hoplite Channel, Prince Part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're having a happy Halloween. And we will see you back here for Part 2 shortly. I will get into some more history as to the age in which Machiavelli lived and what kind of figure was he? How did he rise to the position where he was going to write a book for Lorenzo de' Medici, the son of the Medici family, and his lasting legacy I'll cover in part 3. Okay, if you're liking this, give it a thumbs up. Always use a new subscriber if this is your first time coming by. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you back here next time. Till then, take care.